How's it going, everybody? Been thinking about this video for a couple of weeks at least. I came up with this. I didn't come up with it. I saw something that made me get real curious about the way we use language, and I had a lot of ideas about it, but I didn't know what to call it. What is it? What is it? So I went and did some research, and in case you don't believe me, it's not like you wouldn't believe me, but these are all references of stuff that I went and saw. I didn't read through all of that because some of that stuff is behind a paywall. These are all research studies and papers that have been written and stuff like that have something to do with this topic. I realized it's a fairly wide-ranging topic. So I wrote down some stuff so that I wouldn't forget, because there's a lot to this. But I didn't really script this out. I just wrote down some things that I didn't want to forget, and then I included all those references just in case you were curious. There's actually 4 pages of them, 3.5 pages of them. But what it was that I was thinking about, I wanted to explore how, in my head, laziness or sloppiness in our language leads to so many fundamental misunderstandings between people. And unironically, the use of the word it, I've used it a few times in this video so far without saying what it is. It's an extremely general term, but it's used to describe something very specific when we use it. We know what it is, or at least I thought we know what it is. And I think in some instances, this is laziness or sloppiness with our language. Then the more I read, the more I realized there could be something really sinister going on with this. But the term that I saw bantered back and forth between 2 different parties was, you just don't get it. No, you just don't get it. I get it. You don't get it. And I was like, they're going to go around in circles until time runs out. They're never going to figure out what they're talking about, because neither one of them will identify what they're actually talking about. And then one of the things that I found was it's a linguistic phenomenon that occurs where a generalized term can create assumptions and barriers and all kinds of, problems with understanding. In phrases like "you just don't get it," it's kind of like a semantic sleight of hand. The shell game. Where is it? Well, if I can hide it from the person. And one of the things I came across, it said the speaker assumes a shared understanding of what it represents, perhaps a concept, feeling, cultural norm, complex situation, but they never explicitly define what it is they're talking about. And that creates all kind of miscommunication. And then a couple of different things I found by reading through those papers was there's something, the presumption of shared context. The speaker believes their internal understanding is obvious or universal, when really it might refer to something highly specific to their experience, their worldview, their cultural background. What feels self-evident to them could be completely opaque to whoever they're talking to. They just can't see it because they don't know what it is. And then another thing I found was it can become argumentatively protective. I love that term, because it remains undefined. The speaker can't be pinned down on specifics. This is where I think it can get kind of be used as a weapon. If they're challenged, they can always claim the other person is misunderstanding, since there's no clear target to, for them to land on. And that's a form of gaslighting. Yeah, you just don't understand. Really? What is it that I don't understand? And then third, another thing I found was a concept called conceptual fuzziness. Or it said that it can mask conceptual fuzziness in the speaker's own thinking. They may not have clearly articulated themselves in what it actually encompasses, because they don't know. The vague language, I love this, the vague language reflects vague thinking. And that's a personal problem. If somebody doesn't get it, whatever you're trying to get across, you need to put it across in a more clear way so that they can get it, if you actually care about them getting it, which is, I'm not confident that that's the case sometimes. And then one of those, they used an example in one of those articles I read. It said, consider how different a conversation can go when we force specificity. Instead of you don't get it, what if we said, you don't understand why this situation makes me feel dismissed, or you're missing the historical context that makes this a problem. Now you have something to discuss. There's something concrete there. Whether you agree or disagree with it, at least you're both talking about the same thing. And, then I started thinking that it's more than just you don't get it. There's all kinds of these little phrases that people use in a combative, defensive, argumentative kind of way. We end up talking past each other, and I think a lot of times people take that as the other person's just stupid or whatever, when they may be on the same page as you, or they may have a different point of view as you do, and you both can come to a clearer understanding of whatever it is you're talking about. But you end up, the cost is misunderstanding. And then, so here's some of those other phrases. And I found examples of these in some of these papers. Some of these I had thought of before. They're just common phrases, but these people, some of these research papers had tackled some of this stuff specifically. I like this one. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. And what somebody had to say about this is, this declares a judgment without specifying the criteria being applied. Wrong according to what standard? Morally, factually, strategically, aesthetically? The speaker treats their framework as universal when it's often highly personal or contextual. Another one, these are all gaslighting type things, or can be used in that way. Everyone knows that. Everybody knows that. This often appeals to a consensus, a phantom consensus, while shutting down the inquiry. Who exactly is everyone? Everybody knows that. Often this means people in my immediate social circle, people in my bubble, but it gets presented as universal knowledge, making dissent seem ignorant rather than legitimate. It's a weapon. It's complicated. Sometimes that can be accurate, but it basically is camouflage. It suggests depth while providing no actual insight. What factors make it complicated? How do they interact? The complexity claim becomes a conversation stopper rather than a starting point for deeper, analysis of whatever it is you're talking about. I think people use that when they don't want to understand what it is they think about a thing, or they already know that they're standing on shaky ground and they just don't want to get into this conversation because they think the other person's going to win. That's not how things work. This implies some kind of natural or inevitable order without explaining the mechanisms involved. It treats contingent social arrangements, institutional practices, or cultural norms as if they were laws of physics. Here's another one. You're missing the point. And that's very similar to you just don't get it. It suggests there's one correct interpretation while avoiding the work of actually making the point. It's often used when the speaker hasn't clearly formulated their own opinion. Here's a good one. Obviously. Signals what follows should be self-evident, preemptively labeling any disagreement as obtuse or wrong or whatever. It's a rhetorical power move that bypasses the need for any actual reasoning or evidence or anything like that. You hear this one a lot. Common sense? That's just common sense. Common sense says this. Very similar to everybody knows that. This appeals to an imaginary universal logic while disguising a particular assumption as objective reasoning. And then all of these shortcuts, allow whoever's making these points, or not making these points, instead using this kind of language, to feel as though they've said something substantial while actually avoiding any type of, preciseness or evidence or complexity, genuineness. And then I got curious about, what is it, you see this often, when two people are arguing and they have two different it's, what it is they're trying to defend, such as, one person saying, you don't get it, in relation to a claim such as, I don't know, pick it out of a hat. Women, men, this culture, this race, that race, whatever. They're inherently controlling. When then the other person says, no, you don't get it, in reference to the idea that individuals should be assessed by their own merit, not as part of some group identity. And that is one of the most insidious, negative, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is. It's just intellectually lazy, I think. I think it goes beyond linguistically lazy. It's intellectually lazy. But both of them can feel completely justified talking about what they're talking about when they're talking about two different things. Person A's it, in that example, like, so-and-so are just inherently controlling. They may say that because of personal experience with a specific person in that group, or evolutionary, this was from one of the papers, evolutionary psychology theories about, sexual differences or mate selection or something like that, or just, cultural observations, the way those people, or, while person B, the person that says, you don't get it, in reference to a person being assessed by their own qualities instead of part of a group, it might include, their reasoning might include, principles about dignity or fairness or stereotyping or, statistical understanding about the particular subject they're talking about, historical awareness of how this kind of language is used to justify whatever discrimination or any number of things, terrible things. And then what's sad about it is that both people might actually agree on more than they realize. If you get specific about stuff, that that one person may realize that all men, women, whatever race, culture, whatever, that all of them aren't like that, while the other person may realize that, you know, certain social dynamics do exist in certain situations, but the vagueness of the it prevents them from figuring out even what they're talking about. Yeah, one of the statements in one of those papers says they're locked in parallel monologues. It's like they're two dragsters going down the drag strip. You know, their goal, even though they're racing the other person, their goal has nothing to do with that person. Their goal is what's in front of them. That's all they can see. And then the whole "you don't get it" or any of those phrases really escalate conversations. It's not just disagreement. It comes down to like an accusation of, you know, basically you're telling the other person they're stupid. You're just stupid. Both parties become invested in defending their mysterious it rather than exploring what they actually think and why they think it. And this is from one of the papers. This is where linguistic precision can become a moral issue. The vagueness isn't just inefficient communication. It prevents people from examining their own assumptions and finding nuanced positions that might allow for genuine dialogue. Yeah, I mean, I found it somewhat fascinating when I was thinking about this, that so much research has been done on this. There's literally the bottom half of this page from like here down, and then that page, half of that page, and then four other full pages worth of stuff. If you're interested in any of those studies, let me know. I have them saved in a text file. I'll see if I can figure out a way to get those links if you're actually interested. But the problem is, like I said, a lot of it's behind paywalls. You can only read the overview of some of these studies, not all of them, but a lot of them. But anyway, you know, what do you think about this kind of stuff where people just, they're so attached to their it that they'll never see anything outside of it, and yet they refuse to define it. They refuse to make it clear for the other person, and the other person they're talking with is usually in the same boat. But anyway, this video's gone a little bit long. I hope YouTube will allow me to upload it. Let me know what you think.